This is a true story, and the HOA has long been a thorn in the side of the residents. Here's the full story. The crisp autumn air did little to soothe the simmering resentment that had taken root in my chest. Another certified letter from the Hawthorne Creek Homeowners Association lay on the kitchen counter, its stark white envelope a stark contrast to the warm wood. Inside, the familiar accusatory tone outlined yet another violation: continued neglect of overgrown vegetation at the rear of the property. This time, the fine had escalated to $350. $350. For a vine that, I was increasingly convinced, existed only in the hyperactive imagination of one particularly zealous neighbor. My wife, Sarah, sighed as she read the letter over my shoulder. "Not again, Mark. This is getting ridiculous." Her brow furrowed, mirroring my own frustration. "It's not like we're running some jungle back there. You hacked that thing down weeks ago." "Exactly," I exclaimed, running a hand through my already disheveled hair. "I practically performed open-heart surgery on those AC units to yank out every last tendril. You can't even see where it was unless you're practically straddling the condensers." The condensers. Two hulking metal boxes that sat nestled against the back of our two-story home, humming their tireless tune against the relentless Texas heat. Between them, in a narrow, sun-drenched crevice, a tenacious Virginia creeper had once thrived. Now, after my persistent efforts, only the faintest ghost of its existence remained, a few stubborn roots clinging to the brick, utterly invisible from any public vantage point. Our neighbor, Mrs. Eleanor Abernathy, lived in the two-story brick house that loomed just a few feet to the east of our property line. A woman of sharp angles and sharper opinions, Eleanor had been a fixture in Hawthorne Creek for decades, her reign as self-appointed neighborhood watchdog legendary. While other neighbors exchanged polite waves and the occasional friendly chat, interactions with Eleanor were usually punctuated by thinly veiled criticisms and unsolicited advice. Could it be her? Was Eleanor the one meticulously documenting this phantom foliage, somehow contorting herself to peer between our AC units or, worse, stepping onto our property to get a better view? The thought sent a fresh wave of anger coursing through me. "I'm telling you, Sarah, she's the only one who would care this much," I said, my voice tight. "Old Mrs. Abernathy probably spends her afternoons peering through her blinds, just waiting for a stray leaf to offend her delicate sensibilities." Sarah nodded slowly. "It does seem likely. But how is she even seeing it? Our houses are so close, her view from that side is almost entirely blocked." That was the crux of the matter. Unless Eleanor possessed X-ray vision or was willing to trespass, the vine was effectively invisible. The CC&RS, the labyrinthine document that governed our lives within Hawthorne Creek, stipulated adherence to certain aesthetic standards, but it also implied a reasonable expectation of privacy and property rights. Did that include the right to not have your backyard scrutinized by a neighbor who might be stepping onto your land to find something to complain about? "I've had enough," I declared, my frustration reaching a boiling point. "I'm setting up a camera." Sarah looked at me, a mixture of apprehension and agreement in her eyes. "A surveillance camera? Isn't that a bit much?" "Much? Sarah, we've been fined almost $1,000 this year for a plant no one can even see. My property value is taking a hit because some busybody is on a power trip. Much is having to constantly defend ourselves against these ridiculous accusations. This ends now." The next day, armed with a discreet outdoor security camera and a healthy dose of paranoia, I set about my covert operation. I positioned the camera near the corner of the house, its lens angled to capture any activity along the narrow strip of land between our house and Eleanor's. It was high enough to be out of casual sight but low enough to provide a clear view of anyone approaching the back of our property. The waiting began. Days turned into a week, each passing hour punctuated by a nervous anticipation. I checked the camera footage religiously, my heart quickening every time I saw a figure enter the frame. Delivery drivers, the occasional stray cat, even the neighborhood kids chasing a runaway ball, all were meticulously reviewed, but no Eleanor. Just as I was starting to doubt my theory, a flicker of movement on the screen caught my eye. It was late afternoon, the shadows stretching long across the yard. A figure emerged from Eleanor's back door, her familiar silhouette unmistakable. She moved with a surprising agility for her age, her gaze fixed on our property line. My breath hitched as I watched her approach the narrow gap between our houses. She paused at the edge of our lawn, her head craning slightly. Then, she did something that made my blood run cold. She took a deliberate step onto our property, her foot landing squarely on the patch of grass bordering the AC units. She stood there for a moment, her gaze sweeping over the area. Even on the grainy footage, I could see the focused intensity in her posture. Then, she bent down, her hand disappearing briefly behind one of the condensers. When she straightened, she seemed to nod to herself before stepping back onto her own property and returning inside. Rage, hot and sharp, surged through me. She was trespassing. She was deliberately coming onto our land to find something, anything, to report. The audacity of it. I replayed the footage, zooming in on her actions. What was she doing behind the AC unit? Was she planting something? Or perhaps, removing something? A small, almost imperceptible detail caught my eye. As she straightened up, I could have sworn she was holding a small, dark object in her hand. The next morning, fueled by a righteous fury, I decided to confront Eleanor. Sarah, ever the voice of reason, tried to dissuade me. Mark, maybe we should just talk to the HOA with the video evidence first. No, Sarah. I want to see the look on her face when she knows we know, I retorted, my jaw tight. She's been harassing us for months, costing us money and peace of mind. It's time she faced the consequences. I marched across the small expanse of lawn separating our houses and rang Eleanor's doorbell. The chimes echoed through the silent morning air. After a long moment, the door creaked open, revealing Eleanor standing in the dimly lit hallway, her expression a mask of suspicion. Yes, she snapped, her voice as sharp as broken glass. Eleanor, we need to talk, I said, trying to keep my voice level despite the turmoil inside me. About what? She asked, her eyes narrowed. About the HOA reports. About the overgrown vegetation that no one can see. A flicker of something, guilt. Surprise. Crossed her face, but it was gone before I could be sure. I have no idea what you're talking about, she said, her tone dismissive. Oh, I think you do, I countered, stepping closer. I have proof, Eleanor. I know you've been coming onto our property. Her eyes widened slightly. That's a lie, she exclaimed, her voice rising. I would never trespass on your land. The camera doesn't lie, Eleanor, I said, my voice low and steady. I saw you. Yesterday afternoon. Behind the AC units. Her face paled slightly, but she quickly recovered. I was looking for my cat, she stammered. He sometimes wanders into your yard. Your cat? I scoffed. Eleanor, you don't own a cat. She blinked, momentarily thrown off. Well, perhaps it was a stray. I saw something moving back there. And that something just happened to coincide with another HOA report. I pressed. Come on, Eleanor. This has to stop. I haven't reported anything recently, she insisted, her voice regaining some of its usual sharpness. Then who has? I challenged. Because someone is going out of their way to scrutinize a part of our yard that's practically invisible. The confrontation ended with Eleanor vehemently denying any wrongdoing and slamming the door in my face. I returned home, the initial satisfaction of confronting her quickly replaced by a gnawing unease. She had lied so easily, so convincingly. Was it possible that someone else was involved? I re-examined the camera footage from the past few weeks, this time with a more critical eye. I noticed something I had previously overlooked. On several occasions, just before an HOA violation notice arrived, a dark-colored sedan had been parked down the street, its occupant obscured by tinted windows. The car was always gone by the time I thought to look for it. Could Eleanor be working with someone? Someone who had a legitimate reason to be on HOA business but was perhaps being influenced. The next HOA meeting was scheduled for the following week, and I decided to attend, armed with my video evidence and my growing suspicions. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a bland, beige room that always felt too small for the simmering tensions it often contained. Mr. Henderson, the perpetually flustered HOA president, called the meeting to order. The usual topics were discussed: landscaping guidelines, parking regulations, the ongoing debate about the color of the new community sign. Then, Mr. Henderson cleared his throat and turned his attention to me. "Mr. Davies," he said, his voice tinged with a hint of weariness, "we've received several more complaints regarding the vegetation at the rear of your property." I stood up, holding up my tablet. "Mr. Henderson, I'd like to address these complaints. I believe I have evidence that will shed some light on the situation." I connected my tablet to the projector, and the grainy footage of Eleanor trespassing onto my property filled the screen. A collective murmur rippled through the room. Eleanor, who was sitting in the front row, gasped audibly. "As you can see," I said, my voice steady, "this is Mrs. Abernathy on my property, inspecting an area that is not visible from any public right-of-way. This has happened on multiple occasions, often just before we receive a violation notice." Mr. Henderson looked visibly uncomfortable. "Mrs. Abernathy, do you have an explanation for this?" Eleanor, her face flushed, stammered, I was concerned about safety. I thought there might be pests." A few skeptical coughs echoed through the room. "Pests that can only be seen by trespassing?" I countered. "And how do you explain the fact that these inspections consistently precede these fines?" Before Eleanor could respond, a voice from the back of the room spoke up. "Perhaps Mrs. Abernathy isn't the only one with concerns." All eyes turned to Mr. Caldwell, a stern-faced man who had recently joined the HOA board. He had a reputation for being meticulous and uncompromising in his adherence to the community guidelines. "Mr. Davies," Mr. Caldwell continued, his gaze unwavering, "while Mrs. Abernathy's methods may be unorthodox, the fact remains that there have been repeated complaints about your landscaping. But those complaints are about a single vine that's practically invisible." I exclaimed, my frustration bubbling to the surface. "Have any of you actually seen this so-called overgrown vegetation from a legitimate vantage point?" A few hesitant glances were exchanged, but no one spoke up. "Furthermore," I continued, emboldened by the room's apparent unease, "I've noticed a pattern. A dark sedan has been seen parked down the street around the time these reports are likely being filed." Mr. Caldwell's expression remained impassive. "Many residents drive dark sedans, Mr. Davies. But this particular sedan seems to appear and disappear with suspicious timing," I insisted. "I intend to obtain further evidence." The meeting adjourned without a clear resolution. Mr. Henderson promised to look into the matter, but his tone lacked conviction. I left the clubhouse feeling a mix of vindication and renewed determination. Eleanor's trespassing was out in the open, but the source of the relentless report still felt shrouded in mystery. Over the next few weeks, I intensified my surveillance efforts. I installed additional cameras, strategically placed to capture any activity near our property line and the street in front of our houses. I also started paying closer attention to the neighborhood, noting the comings and goings of unfamiliar vehicles. One evening, while reviewing the latest camera footage, I noticed the dark sedan again. This time, it parked a few houses down from Eleanor's. A man in a dark suit emerged and walked towards Eleanor's house. He wasn't someone I recognized. Intrigued, I zoomed in on the footage. The man was carrying a briefcase. Eleanor opened her door and greeted him warmly, ushering him inside. He stayed for over an hour. The next morning, another HOA violation notice arrived. This one was different. It wasn't about the vine. This time, it cited a prohibited modification to the exterior of the property, specifically, the small satellite dish we had installed on the back of our house to improve our internet service. The dish was barely visible from the street. A cold dread washed over me. This felt targeted, personal. Someone was actively looking for violations, no matter how minor or obscure. And Eleanor seemed to be involved. I decided to do some digging. I started by discreetly asking other neighbors if they had received any unusual HOA notices or had any strange encounters. Mrs. Davison, who lived across the street, mentioned receiving a vague warning about potential obstructions in her driveway, even though her driveway was always clear. Mr. Lee, a retired gentleman down the block, said he had been politely informed that his bird feeder was technically in violation of a rarely enforced rule about attracting wildlife. A pattern was emerging. It seemed Eleanor wasn't just focused on our yard. She, or someone working with her, was scrutinizing the entire neighborhood. My suspicions about the man in the dark suit intensified. Who was he? What was his connection to Eleanor and the HOA? I decided to take a more direct approach. The next time I saw the dark sedan parked near Eleanor's house, I walked over and waited a safe distance away. After about an hour, the man emerged. As he walked towards his car, I approached him. "Excuse me," I said, my voice polite but firm. "Are you with the Hawthorne Creek HOA?" The man stopped and turned, his expression guarded. He was in his late 40s, with sharp features and an air of quiet authority. "That depends," he said, his eyes scanning me. "Why do you ask?" "I've noticed you visiting Mrs. Abernathy on several occasions," I said. "And shortly after, my family receives HOA violation notices that seem unusually specific." The man's gaze hardened. "I'm not at liberty to discuss HOA matters with individual residents. But these matters directly affect me," I pressed. "My family is being unfairly targeted, and it seems to coincide with your visits to Mrs. Abernathy." He hesitated for a moment, then sighed. "Look, I'm a compliance consultant hired by the HOA to ensure adherence to the community guidelines." "A compliance consultant who takes his marching orders from Eleanor Abernathy?" I challenged. He chuckled humorlessly. "Mrs. Abernathy is a very concerned resident. She brings a lot of potential violations to our attention. Potential violations that often require trespassing to observe." I retorted, raising an eyebrow. The consultant's demeanor shifted. "I'm not aware of any trespassing. My role is simply to investigate and document any reported issues." "And Mrs. Abernathy provides these reports?" He nodded curtly. "She's a very thorough observer." The pieces started to fall into place. Eleanor, driven by her obsessive need for order and control, was enlisting the help of this consultant to enforce her personal vision of Hawthorne Creek. He, perhaps eager to justify his employment or simply swayed by Eleanor's forceful personality, was diligently following up on her observations, even if those observations required her to step onto private property. "You do realize that some of these observations are impossible without trespassing?" I said, my voice rising slightly. "The vine you keep citing, for example, is completely hidden between my AC units." The consultant's expression remained neutral. "If there are concerns about how information is being gathered, you should address them with the HOA board." I said, my frustration evident. "But it seems some members are more receptive to Mrs. Abernathy's enthusiasm than others." The conversation ended with the consultant offering a terse, "I'll look into it," before getting into his car and driving away. I watched him go, a sense of grim determination settling within me. This wasn't just about a rogue vine anymore. This was about abuse of power, about one person's petty grievances disrupting the lives of others. I decided to take my evidence directly to the HOA board, bypassing Mr. Henderson if necessary. I compiled all the camera footage, the violation notices, and the accounts from other neighbors. I even drafted a formal letter outlining my concerns and demanding an investigation into Eleanor's activities and the consultant's role. The next HOA board meeting was a tense affair. I presented my evidence, the video footage playing on the large screen in the clubhouse. The board members watched in stunned silence as Eleanor repeatedly trespassed onto my property. The accounts from other neighbors about seemingly baseless violations added to the growing sense of unease in the room. Eleanor, initially defiant, grew increasingly flustered under the weight of the evidence. Mr. Caldwell, however, remained her staunch defender. "This is all circumstantial," he argued. "Mrs. Abernathy may have had legitimate reasons to be near Mr. Davies' property. And the other violations are simply a matter of enforcing the community guidelines. Guidelines that weren't enforced until Mrs. Abernathy and your consultant arrived on the scene," I countered. "This isn't about upholding standards, Mr. Caldwell. This is about harassment." The debate grew heated, factions forming within the board. Some members were clearly appalled by Eleanor's actions and the consultant's apparent complicity. Others, seemingly aligned with Mr. Caldwell, dismissed my concerns as the complaints of a disgruntled resident. Just when it seemed the meeting would end in a stalemate, Mrs. Davison stood up. "I have something to add," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "A few